In this Blender tutorial, I'll show you how to create this procedural rocky beach sand material. So after we create the procedural material, I'll also show you how to join it together into this custom node group so you can control the values of the material. So I'm just going to review the material. So we first have this scale value here to change the size of the material. And then we also have this cool sand detail value. So if you want to make it very detailed, you can do that. Or if you want it to be more smooth, you can leave the detail down. Then we also have the wave scale. So if you want more waves, you can turn that up. And then we also have the noise scale just to add some overall noise and bump to the sand. Then we also have a few different custom colors here. So we have the sand color 1 and also the sand color 2. Then we have the rock scale. So there's little rocks all over the material. And so you can use this scale value to change the size of those rocks. And then we also have the color for the rocks. Then we have the roughness of the material, so if you want the sand to look a bit more wet, you could turn this down and make it a little bit more shiny. And then we also have the waves bump strength. Then we also have the sand bump strength. And then we also have the rocks bump strength to pop that out if you want to make the rocks look a bit bigger. And then we also have the displacement strength to make the displacement actually pop out the mesh. And if you'd like to help support the channel and purchase this material, you can get that on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. The links are in the description. And to purchase all of my materials, definitely check out my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack, which comes with all of my procedural materials pre-set up for Blender's asset browser with custom thumbnails, sorted catalogs, and customizable node groups. You can also purchase my procedural material packs, which are just packs of 10 different materials. And you can also purchase all of my materials individually on my Gumroad store. And to learn how to create all of my procedural materials, you can check out my Blender Procedural Material Tutorial playlist here on YouTube. And then one more thing before we start, I wanted to let you know about a really great Blender add-on for doing quick and easy texture baking. Quick Baker is a great Blender add-on for quick and easy texture baking. Once you install the add-on, you can access the add-on on the 3D viewport side panel. First, add a name and a bake group. You can then choose the objects and materials that you want to bake. Make sure you also UV unwrap your objects. You can then choose what texture maps you want to bake, like the base color, roughness, normal, metallic, and many more maps. Then hit bake and the add-on will automatically bake all the textures and will save the texture maps to your computer. You can also use the add-on to bake high poly detail to a low poly mesh. Check out my full add-on review video with the link in the description, and if you purchase the add-on through my affiliate link, you'll be helping to support this channel. So real quick, I'll show you what I have set up in the 3D viewport if you want to set up the blend file the same way that I have. So I want to add a sphere to preview the material on. So I'll go to the add menu, we'll go here to mesh, and I'm going to add an icosphere. Now, right after you add the icosphere, before you move it around or click away, you can click right behind me on the add icosphere settings. And I'm going to turn the subdivisions up to 6 because I want it to be much more detailed so the displacements have more geometry to work with. And then I can close the add icosphere settings. We can also use the object context menu to shade the object smooth. Now when modeling to the real life scale in Blender, the default objects are quite large, so this is a bit larger than an average human. So I'm going to scale this object down by 0.3. Hit enter, and then I will press Ctrl A to apply the scale. We'll just click here on scale, so that is now the object's new default size. Then I added a camera and I just pointed the camera at the object. And also right over here on the output properties, I made the resolution X and Y the same values so that it's a square image. Now for the lighting, I added these different area lights right here. So you can see I have 3 different area lights. So this first one right up here, this is kind of shining down on the sphere, and I made the color white and the power to 200. And I also changed it to rectangle so that I could change the size X and Y. And then these other 2 area lights are a strength of 400 and they're also a white color, but they're a bit farther back and a bit larger. And I also set the shape to rectangle and made them so they are going upwards, just to give kind of a rim light on the edges of the sphere. So if I go into rendered mode, you can now see there's the lighting. And then I also added in an HDRI to get some even more realistic lighting and reflections. So if you click here on the world properties, I added in this HDRI from polyhaven.com. I'll have a link in the video description if you'd like to download the same HDRI that I'll be using. And I downloaded the 1K version and the HDR version. So once you download the HDRI, you can click here on the yellow dot next to color, and you can click on environment texture and then just click on the open button to open up the HDRI. Now also to make the lighting look a bit nicer, I'm going to go here to the render properties, and if you go down here to the color management, I'm using the view transform of Filmic, and also the look, I set that to high contrast to pop out the colors and make everything more contrasty and saturated. And then also, if you want to make the background transparent, you can open up the film tab and just check mark the transparent button. Now, I'm also going to be using the displacements, so if you want to use the displacements, you will need to be using the Cycles rendering engine, because the material displacements do not work in Eevee, so make sure you're using Cycles. So I went over to the shading workspace, so I have the 3D viewport right over here, and I'm in the rendered mode, and then I also have the shader editor right here. So I'll click on New to add a new material, and I can rename this to Rocky Beach Sand. And then I will also be using the Node Wrangler add-on to preview the different nodes. So if you don't have the Node Wrangler enabled, you can click here on Edit and go to the Preferences. And then you can click right over here on the Add-ons tab, and here on the search, you can start to type in Node, and you can enable the Node Wrangler add-on. So it's built into Blender, and I'll show you how to use it in the video. So let's just close the Blender User Preferences. So to start off, I want to create the texture of the waves. So I'll go to the Add menu, and we're going to search for the wave texture. Let's drop this here, and then because I enabled the Node Wrangler, I can Control Shift and select different nodes, and that is going to preview the node on the object. Now I also want to use the object coordinates, so with the wave texture selected, I'll press Control T to add the texture coordinate and mapping nodes, and let's use the object coordinates, so we'll put the object into the vector, because the object coordinates is going to place the textures on the object more evenly. So now I can change some of the wave texture settings. So I'm going to turn the scale to 6, and then this distortion here, I'll turn to like a 25, so you can see it's a bit distorted. And then also the detail, I'll turn that up to the max of 15. Now I'm going to use this wave texture to distort another texture. So we're going to be adding a noise texture. So let's go to the Add menu, and we're going to search for a noise texture, and we can drop the noise texture after the wave. Now, because this wave texture is going through the vector, it's going to distort the placement of the noise texture. So let's Control Shift and select the noise texture to preview it, and I can change some of the settings. So on the noise texture, I'm going to turn the scale to like a 9, and let's also turn the detail up to the max of 15, and I do want a bit more roughness, so I'll turn the roughness to a 0.75, and I'll leave the other settings how they are. Now real quick, if I just unplug the wave texture, you can see that is how the noise is looking like. And then if I plug the color up to the vector, it is distorting it. But it's distorting it way too much, and I only want it to distort the noise texture a little bit. So to give it less of an effect, I'll go to the Add menu. We're going to search for the Mix Color node, and let's put the mix color in between the wave and the noise. So we're going to use the mix to mix together the original mapping and the wave texture. So let's take this mapping vector, and I'm going to put that into color A. Then we're going to take the wave texture color, and I'll put that into color B. So now if I zoom in closely to the texture and kind of drag this around, you can see if I turn up to 1, it's using the wave, so it's super distorted. Or if I turn the factor down, it's not using the wave at all if the factor is 0. So I'm going to make this a very small number of 0.02. Now it's kind of hard to see because it's kind of gray, so I'm going to add a color ramp to make it more contrasty. So I'll box select these nodes and kind of bring them over, and then I'll go to the Add menu, and we're going to search for a color ramp, and let's put the color ramp here after the noise texture. So now if I drag these two tabs together, that's going to make it much more contrasty. So I'm going to drag both of these tabs together kind of like that. So now you can see we have a cool texture for our sand. So let's box select these 4 nodes here, and these 4 nodes are going to be the sand texture. So with these 4 nodes selected, I'll press Ctrl J. Ctrl J will join it together into a frame, just to keep the nodes nicely organized. And then with the frame selected, I'll press F2 to add a label, and I'll rename this to Sand Texture. And then also these nodes here, I'll box select them, and again hit Ctrl J to join it together into a frame, and I'll select the frame and press F2, and I'm going to rename this to Mapping. And then also what I'll do is hold down the Shift key and right click and drag over these wires to add a reroute, and I'll stick the reroute into the frame. And then I can drag this down here. All right, so the next group of textures that I want to create is the detailed sand, because right now this isn't very detailed and I want very detailed sand to add into the bump. So to do that, I'll go to the Add menu, and we're going to search for a noise texture. And then also I'll go to the Add menu, and we're going to want to make this more contrasty, so I'll also search for a color ramp. So I'll now Control Shift and select the noise texture to preview it, and I want to use the object coordinates, so we'll put the vector here from the mapping into the noise vector. And then let's change some of the settings. So because I want this to be very detailed, I'll turn the scale up to like 500. And then the detail, I'll turn that up to the max of 15. And I want it to be even more detailed, so I'll turn the roughness up to like a 0.9. And then I want it to be more contrasty, so let's put the noise texture factor into the color ramp, and I'll Control Shift and select the color ramp to preview it. So to make it more contrasty, let's just drag the black tab way over so we can see the noise much better. So I'll stick it somewhere like that. So now if I zoom in there, you can see there's very, very fine detail. So I'm going to box select these nodes and hit Control J to join it together into a frame, and I'll select the frame and press F2 to add a label, and I'm just going to rename this to Sand Detail. So I now want to create another texture, which is going to be the color of the rock. So let's just box select both of these here, and I'll duplicate them with Shift D, and we'll just drop this down here. And then again, let's take the mapping vector, and I can put that up into the vector, the noise texture. And then this one, I'll click on this, I'll press F2 to rename it, and I'm going to rename it to Rock Color. So now let's change a few of the settings. Let me just Control Shift and select the color ramp to preview it. So for this one, I'm just going to turn the scale to like 300, but then I will leave the detail at 15, and the roughness I'll turn to like 8.6. Now as for the amount of contrast, I do want to change that a bit, so I'll drag the black tab back a bit, maybe to about here, and then I'll also drag the white tab over to about there. So that's looking pretty good. So now I want to make the colors for the rocks, so I'll drag the color ramp back, and I'll go to the add menu, and we're going to search for a mix color, and let's put the mix color right here on the wire, and then you can drag it here to stick it in the frame. So let's take the color ramp color and we'll put that into the factor. Now the factor is determining what parts are going to be color A and what parts are going to be color B. So the black and white values are going to control that. So it doesn't really have any texture right now because they are both the same color, but if I take this color and kind of make it like a brown color, now you can see the difference. So this one, color A, I'm going to make that like a darker brown, and then color B, that's going to be a similar brown color, but it'll be a little bit lighter. And then if you want to use the same colors that I'm using, then here on color A, you can go to the hex value and you can punch in 47331E. And then here on color B, the hex value for this will be 5A402D. So that's going to be the rock color. So the next group of textures that I want to create is going to be the actual rocks. So for this, I'll go to the add menu and we're going to search for a Voronoi texture. Let's drop this here, and again, let's drag this mapping down here, and I can put the vector into the vector so that it's using the object coordinates, and I'll Control Shift and select the Voronoi texture to preview it. So I want to make the rock smooth, so on the F1 here, let's change this to smooth F1 instead. So then here on the scale, I'm going to make this like 70. So all the little dots there, that is going to actually be the rocks. And then let's turn the detail to 15, which is the max. The roughness we'll leave at 0.5. Now the linearity here, I want to turn this up a little bit. So I'm going to turn it up to a 1.45. So by turning that up, it kind of makes it a little bit more smooth, but it also gives it a bit more of a random shape. If I turn that down, you can kind of see what it's doing. So that is going to look great for the rocks. And then I don't want it to be super smooth, so this smoothness value, I'll just turn to like a 0.55, so it's not quite as smooth. Now I want to have some bigger rocks and some smaller rocks. So I want to make another Voronoi texture which will have smaller rocks. So with the Voronoi selected, I'm going to press Control Shift D to keep the wire plugged up and duplicate it at the same time. And then I can Control Shift and select this one to preview it. So I'm going to leave all the settings the same except for the scale. So for this one, I'm going to turn the scale up to like 100 so that the rocks are even smaller. So now you can see we have two different rocks, some smaller ones and some bigger ones, but I want to join them together. So to do this, we will go to the add menu and we're going to search for the mix color node to mix the two colors together. So let's take the Voronoi distance from this one, we'll put that into color A, and then the Voronoi distance from this one, and we'll put that into color B. And then I can Control Shift and select the mix to preview it. Let me just squish these nodes together so it's a bit more organized. Now right now, if I change the factor, that's going to use only B or only A. But instead of using one or the other, I just want to add all the dark parts because the dark parts are where the rocks are. So we can just take the mix here and we can change the type to darken. And then we'll turn the factor all the way up to 1. So now you can see it's adding just the dark values together so you can see both the bigger rocks and the smaller rocks. Now I want to make this much more contrasty so you can actually tell where the rocks are. So I'll go to the add menu and we're going to search for the color ramp, and we'll stick this here in the wire, drag it down here. And then if I just drag this white tab up and drag it over, I'm going to drag it kind of to about here. Now just where those black parts are, that is where the rocks are going to be. So that's looking a lot better. Now later on in the video when we create the custom node groups, I want to be able to control both of the Voronoi texture scales at the same time. You can see that this one is 70 and this one is 100, but I want to be able to control the rock scale in the custom node group. So what I'm going to do is hold down the shift key and then right click and drag over these wires, and that will add this reroute here. So it is one wire. Now what I can do is go to the add menu and we can search for a mapping node, and we'll put the mapping node here in between the wire after the first mapping. So this way these two scale values are different, but these scale values here, this is going to change the size of both materials at once or both textures at once because they're both going into both of the vectors. So we can use this later in the custom node group to change the size of the rocks. Alright, so I'm going to click and drag to box select these nodes, and I like to keep them super organized so it's easy to understand. So select all the nodes, you can press Ctrl J to join it together into a frame, and then you can press F2 to give that a label, and we'll call that rocks. Alright, so we're going to create one more group of textures, and that is going to be some waves. So I'll go to the add menu, and for that, you may have guessed it, but we're going to add a wave texture. Let's drop this here, and then again I want to use the object coordinates, so we will put the mapping vector into the wave texture vector, stick it right in there, and then we can Control Shift and select the wave texture to preview it. So I want to change some of the settings, so I'm going to turn the scale way down to just like a 0.5. And then this distortion here, I'm going to turn up to like a 70. So now you can see it's very distorted and you can see more of the waves. And then we'll turn the detail to the max of 15, and then the other settings I will leave how they are. Now later on in the tutorial, I'm going to want to make the waves more smooth. So let's go to the add menu and we're going to search for the RGB curves, and we'll drop the RGB curves right here. Now it doesn't really make sense to change the values now because it's not really going to look that much different, but later on when we add this into the bump and the displacement, it'll change how the actual wave shape is. So we'll be going back here and using the RGB curves later. Now I also want to mix this with some noise because I do just want it to be a little bit noisy and not just have the wave. So I'll go to the add menu and we're going to search for the noise texture. Let's drop it under the wave. And then again, I want to use the object coordinates. So I'll plug the mapping vector into the vector of the noise texture. And then I can Control Shift and select the noise to preview it. And let's change some of the settings. So I'll turn the scale to like a 6, and then I actually want to leave the detail at 2 because I want this to be more lumpy, so I actually don't want to turn the detail up too high. But then I do want to turn the roughness up a little bit to like a 0.55. Alright, so now I want to mix the wave and the noise together so that it kind of breaks up the wave and it's not so wavy. So I'll go to the add menu, and again, to mix colors together, we can add the mix color node. So let's drop this here, and then the RGB curves, that can go into color B, and then this noise texture, we're going to take the factor, and we're going to put that into color A. And then let's Control Shift and select this to preview it. So I'm actually just going to leave the factor at 0.5, because you can see if I change this, it's going to change between only using the noise or only using the wave, but I kind of want to have it evenly mixing them, so I'll turn the factor to just a 0.5, so that's pretty good. So now let's box select these nodes here. We can join it into a frame with Ctrl J, and then with the frame selected, you can press F2 to add a label, and I'm just going to call this waves. Alright, so we're now going to create the base color for the sand. So let's go all the way back up here, and I want to create some nodes here to make the base color. So I'll go to the add menu, and I want to mix two of the textures together. So again, to mix two colors together, we're going to add the mix color. Let's select these nodes and kind of move them out of the way so we have a bit more space. So I want to mix the sand detail and the sand texture together to make the base color. So let's take this bottom one here, the sand detail, we'll put that into color B, and then the sand texture here, this color, we're going to put that into color A. And then I'll Control Shift and select this to preview it. You can see it's now mixed them together, and I want to turn the factor up to like a 0.6, because if I turn it up, you can see it's going to have more and more of the detailed sand, so I do just want a little bit more of that detail. So we'll turn that up to a 0.6. Now I also want to add the custom colors because I don't want the sand to just be black and white. So let's duplicate this with Shift D and just drop it here. So because this one here, this is black and white values, we can put that into the factor, and then we'll be able to have custom colors for A and B. So I'll Control Shift and select the mix to preview it. So now let's make the different colors. So I want to have one color which is kind of like a peachy tannish color. So we'll turn this up, kind of like an orangey peachy color, something like that. And then this one here, color A, this is just going to be like a brown color. And if you want to use the same exact colors that I'm using, you can punch in the same hex values. So for color A, this is going to be a hex value of 53402E. And then here for color B, this is going to be a hex value of B9 7A43. So that is going to be the sand base color, so we'll put the result into the base color. And I can Control Shift and select the principled shader to preview it. Now I also want to change the roughness because it's a bit too shiny right now, so I'll turn the roughness to 0.8 because sand is pretty rough. Even if it's wet, even if it's shiny, it's still going to be kind of rough because of how bumpy it is. So I'll turn that roughness up to 0.8. And then let's box select these two nodes here, and I'll join them together into a frame, and then I will add a label, and I'm going to call this sand base color. Now there is a problem with this, and that is that you can't actually see the rock color. So we're going to drag these nodes over, and we're going to add another group of nodes here, which is going to add the rock color. So to do that, we're going to add another mix node. So we'll go here to the add menu, we'll add the mix color node, and we will drop it here. So we can use this to plug in the sand base color and the rocks. So let's actually put the sand base color into color B. So the result is going to go into color B. So now I want to add the rock color. So if we go down here, here is the rock color, and we want to mix that into the sand. So we'll take this mix result and we'll put that into color A. And then you can Control Shift and select the mix to preview it. Now there's a problem with this, and that is that the rock color isn't specifically where the rocks are. It's just kind of blended together over the entire texture. So we can fix this by using this rock map. So if I Control Shift and select this color ramp, you can see this is going to show where the rocks are. So let's take the rocks color ramp, and we will put that into the factor to tell it where the rock color is going to be and where the sand color is going to be. And then Control Shift and select the mix to preview it. So if you zoom in here, you can kind of see the rocks a little bit, but it's way too grayed out and it needs to be more contrasty. So we're going to go to the add menu, and we're going to search for another color ramp to make it more contrasty. So let's drop the color ramp here and bring it up, and let's bring these nodes over so we have a bit more space. So now what I can do is I can take the black color and drag this way over. And by dragging it way over, it's going to make it much more contrasty. So I'll drag this way over here. So if I Control Shift and select the color ramp, we now have a very clear mask of just where the rock is. So I can Control Shift and select the principled shader, and you can see now we have that rock texture there on the base color. So let's box select these nodes and join them together into a frame, and we will add a label, and we're going to rename this to add rock color. Alright, so this material is really smooth, so I want to make it much more bumpy. So what we can do is go down here to the waves, and we can take this wave texture and put it into the normal. So let's take the mix result, I can drag this all the way up here, and we'll stick it into the normal to give it bump data. Now, there's a problem with this, and that is that this here is color data, but then this over here, this is normal data. You can see there's a purple dot there. So we need to convert the color data to normal data. So I'll go to the add menu, and to convert this, we're going to search for the bump node. And we'll put this in the wire here before the normal. Now we actually want to put that color into the height value to convert it to bump data. And now you can see it looks super, super bumpy. Now that is a bit too strong, so I'm going to turn the strength down to just like a 0.6 so it's less bumpy. Now there is a problem with this, and that is that the top parts here are super sharp, and I want to make that a bit more smooth. So if I go way back down here to the waves, we can use the RGB curves to actually make the shape of the waves. So let's click here to add a dot here in the corner, and we're going to drag this way down, and then right here we're going to click to add a dot in the center, and we'll drag this up. And then here we're going to drag this all the way to the bottom. So it starts out here at the very bottom, then it goes up a little bit, and then it goes back down. And we're going to drag this really far down, so just something like that. And now you can see that the wave is still there, but this is actually going to be the shape of the wave, so it's a much more smoother wave, because it's not quite so sharp there on the edges. So that is looking much better. Alright, so let's go back up here to the bump, and I want to add 2 more layers of bump. So I also want to add the sand, which is going to be very detailed, and then I also want to add the rock bump. So let's click on the bump node, and I'll duplicate it with Shift D, and we'll drop it here, and then we'll duplicate it again, so Shift D, and drop another one here. So we have 3 of them. So now for the next one, I want to add the sand, so the detailed sand. So let's take this sand detail, and I can take the color, and I'm going to stick this here into the height value just to add it in. So now if I zoom in here, you can see there's very little detail there. Now it is a bit too strong right now, so I want to turn this strength down. So I'll turn that down to like a 0.4. And then also, if you want to, you can invert it. I am going to invert it because I think that looks just a little bit better. So the last one that I want to add is the rocks. So we can go down here to this rock texture, and we'll take this color ramp color. Let's bring out a wire, and we're going to stick this here into the last height value. So now you can see that the rocks look like they're going back in. So let's turn on the invert, and now the rocks are popping out. And then also that is a bit too strong, so I'll turn the strength down to like a 0.5. But now you can see we have all these bumpy rocks on the sand. So that's looking great. So let's box select these nodes, join it together into a frame, and we'll add a label, and we'll just call it bump. So we now can add the displacement to actually make the material pop out of the mesh. So to make the displacement texture, I'm going to be using the waves and then also the rock color. So I'll go to the add menu and we're going to search for another mix color. Let's drop this here. And we want to take the waves and we're going to put that into color A. And then we're going to take the rock color here and we'll put that into color B. So let's take this mix now that we've created and let's drag it way up here, and this is going to go into the displacement. So let's take the result here and we'll put that into the displacement. Now we're running into the same problem as the normal here. So this is color data, but this is displacement data. So we need to convert this. So we'll go to the add menu and we're going to search for the displacement node and we'll stick this here in between the material output and the mix. And we actually want the mix result to be going into the height value to convert it to displacement data. Now you can see it does look more bumpy, but it's not actually popping out the mesh, and that is because we need to turn on the displacement settings. So let's go over here to the side panel and we're going to go here to the material properties, and let's scroll right down here to the settings, and down here on the surface you can see the displacement is set to bump only, but we want to change this to displacement and bump, and that'll tell that material that it can use the displacements. And also make sure you're using the cycles rendering engine because Eevee doesn't support the material displacements. So now you can see it's working, but you can see it's really small, and so there's a few things that I want to change to make that bigger. So the first thing that I want to do is change the factor. So I'll turn the factor to like a 0.3 because I want it to be a bit more wavy. And then I also want to make it much less strong. So let's go here to the displacement scale. This will make it less strong, and I'll turn it to like a 0.05 so it's much less strong. So that is looking much better. You can see now the edges are a little bit bumpy, but you can see that the material is still going back in a little bit. So here's the original mesh. That's the original mesh. But if I go into rendered mode, you can see it's going down in a bit. So to fix this, we can just make the values brighter to have it pop out more, because if the values are lighter, that is going to pop out of the mesh more with the displacements. So we'll go to the add menu and we're going to search for the math node, and we'll stick this right in here. So this one is going to be editing the waves. So the mix result, that will go into the add, and then that's going to go into color A. So on this add here, I can change the type, and I want to make it to multiply so that it is stronger. So now here on the value, if I turn this up more and more, it's going to make it a bit stronger and kind of bring it out more. So I'm going to turn this value to just like a 2, so it's making it a bit bigger. You could also turn it up to like a 3 if you wanted to. And then you can also turn this scale down to make it less strong, and then to bring it up more and bring it out, you can change that value. So now these 3 nodes here, these are going to be the displacement nodes. So let's box select them, we'll join them together into a frame, and we'll rename the frame, and we're going to call this displacement. And there we have it. So there is the finished rocky beach sand material. Now to make this much easier to use, I'll be joining it together into a custom node group. So let's box select all of the nodes except the material output, and to join it together into a node group, you can press Ctrl G. So then you can hit the tab key with the node group selected to go in and out of the node group. And let's drag the node group over here. And let's also make it a little bit bigger. And then I want to have it the same name. So we'll copy the name here with Control C and then Control V there just to paste the name. So it's called Rocky Beach Sand. So let's go into the node group with the tab key, and I want to hit the N key to open the side panel, and you can click over here and group. Now the BSDF, I want to rename this to shader because I just like that better. So now if we go into the node group and go over here to the group input, we can add different values up to the group input, and then we can control those values outside of the node group. So I first want to change the overall scale of the entire material. So let's put the scale here into the extra socket. And if I go outside of the node group, you can now see that we have that scale there. However, there are 3 values to change the scale, and I just want to have 1 value to change the entire scale. So we'll go back into the node group. And then if you click here on scale, we want to change the type from vector to float, so that it is using 1 value. Now we want to turn the default value back to 1, and then we need to go outside of the node group. We need to turn the scale back to 1, and now you can see that'll control the scale. So we'll go back into the node group. Now I also want to control the sand detail. So if we drag the group input down here, there's a really cool value for this. So this noise texture here within the wave, if I change the detail here, you can see that'll make it look nice and bumpy and more detailed. So we'll put the detail into the extra socket here. And then if I double click on this, I'm going to rename it to sand detail. And then I also want to control the wave scale. So this wave scale here, that'll change the waves. So I'll put the scale into the extra socket, and then I can double click on this to rename it, and I'll rename it to wave scale. And then I want to do the same thing for this noise scale. So I just want to be able to control that noise. So we'll put the scale into the extra socket and rename this one, and we'll rename this one to noise scale. So now I want to add the sand colors. So we'll take the group input and we're going to bring it way up here just so it's easier to plug the values into it. So we'll bring it up here and we can take color A, put that into the extra socket, and color B, plug that into the extra socket. And then we can rename these. So sand color 1. And then this one here, the second one, that'll be sand color 2. And then if the group input goes into a frame, you can press Alt P. Alt P will just clear that from the frame. So now it is free. Now I also want to control the rocks scale to make them bigger or smaller. So if I just go right down here, you can see here's the rocks, and we added this mapping earlier, and because this mapping is plugged up to both Voronoi, it'll change both scale values at once. So let's put the scale into the extra socket here, and then if I click here on scale, you can see again it's going to be 3 values just like the overall scale. So we will change the type here to float instead, and then the default value we'll turn that to 1, and if we go out of the node group, we now need to turn the scale back to 1, but now you can see that'll change the size of the rocks. So we'll go back into the node group, and then also if I double click on this, let's rename it to rocks scale. And then I want to control the rocks color. So that's going to be these values right here, the rock color. So we'll put A into the extra socket and B, put that into the extra socket. And then I'll rename this to rock color 1. And then the second one here, I'm going to rename that one to rock color 2. Then I want to be able to control the roughness of the material. So let's drag the group input over here, drag it over there, and then here's the roughness and it's on the base color. So we'll put the roughness into the extra socket here and it's already renamed to roughness. And then I also want to control the bump strength. So this first one here is going to change the wave bump strength. So we'll put that into the extra socket and we can rename this. This one is going to be wave bump strength. Now the second one here, that is going to be the sand bump strength. So we'll put the strength into the extra socket here, and this one will be sand bump strength. And then this last one here, if I drag this over, you can see that is going to be the strength of the rocks. So we'll put that one into the extra socket, and this one is going to be rocks bump strength. And then at the very end here, I also want to control the displacement strength. So if I drag this one over here, the displacement scale, that is going to control the strength. So we'll put that into the extra socket. And then this one, I'll rename to displacement strength. And then we could also add the displacement amount. So we could actually take this multiply value here, and we could just put that into the extra socket here. And then I'll rename this one to displacement amount, just so that we have a bit more control over the displacement. All right, so I'll drag the group input way back over here. Here's all the custom values. I'll hit the tab key to go outside of the node group, and we'll hit the end key to close that side panel, and the material is now finished. So we can just review the material. So we have the overall scale, we also have the sand detail, and then also the wave scale and the noise scale. And then we also have the different colors here of the sand. And then we also have the rock scale to make them really small if you want to. You could make them really small and make them look more like pebbles. And then we also have the rocks color. Then we have the roughness of the material, so you can make it look a bit more wet and shiny if you want to. And then we also have the different strengths, so the wave and the sand and the rock bump strengths. And then we have a few displacement settings, so this is going to be the displacement strength and then the displacement amount to kind of bring the displacement up or down. So that's going to be it for this tutorial, so I hope you enjoyed this, and thank you for watching. And if you'd like to help support the channel and purchase the material, you can get that on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page with the links below. And if you like using procedural materials in your artwork, then definitely check out my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack, which comes with all of my procedural materials pre-set up in Blender's asset browser with custom thumbnails, sorted catalogs, and customizable node groups. And you can also check out my procedural material packs, which are just packs of 10 materials, and you can also purchase all of my materials individually on my Gumroad store. And to learn how to create any of my procedural materials, definitely check out my Blender Procedural Material Tutorial playlist here on YouTube. Again, links are all in the description. So I hope you enjoyed this, and thank you for watching.